Well, welcome. It's so great to have people here. I'm very excited to tell this story. Yay, April. So I've been very excited about foolish stories, about foolish people and fools and noodleheads and nincompoops. And I have one in particular that I've been working on for a while that I really, really love. This is an Italian story, and it's a story from the Italian Renaissance. And it is part of a collection called the Pentamerone by one Giambattista Basile. And he told a lot of great stories. He wrote a lot of wonderful stories from the folk tradition, and this is a Neapolitan story, which was originally written in the Neapolitan dialect. And it is called Vardiello. Vardiello was a very, very not smart person. Vardiello was a fool. His mother was very, very wise. In fact, her only real failing was the degree to which she just adored her son. The two of them lived together, and in addition to Vardiello, his mother also was in possession of a fine laying hen. And this hen had laid a clutch of eggs. And Granonia, who is the mother of Vardiello, placed great store by these eggs because she expected that someday they would hatch into more wonderful laying chickens and she'd be able to sell them. So these eggs were very, very precious to her. And she watched every day to make sure that the chickens stayed on the nest of eggs and kept them warm so that they would incubate at the proper temperature. Fine. Until one day when Granonia had to leave the house. Well, the problem there was that it meant leaving Vardiello at home in charge, which is not a great scenario, but she had no choice. So she spoke to Vardiello very clearly, gave him the instructions to make sure that the chicken didn't leave the nest, so that the eggs would stay warm at the right temperature. This was very, very important. The other thing she was concerned about was that Vardiello was something of a glutton. He would eat anything in sight. And she had a jar of pickled walnuts that she had worked very hard to make, and she was saving them for a special occasion, and she wanted to make sure that Vardiello wasn't going to eat them. So what she did was she pointed up to the shelf where the jar was sitting, and she said, "Vardiello, be sure not to go near that jar. It is filled with poison." "Oh, okay, Mama." So Vardiello decided he would stay away from the jar, he would take care of the chicken, and all would be well. So she left. Well, Vardiello went out into the yard and he puttered around and he played and he this and that and everything was okay until he looked and he saw that the chicken had gotten off of her nest and left the house and was wandering around the yard, scratching and picking. And Vardiello, "Oh, chicken, get back in the nest, back in the nest." For some odd reason, the chicken didn't show Vardiello any respect at all and refused to listen to him. So there he is chasing the chicken around the yard. Shoo, get, and the chicken would not go back to the nest. And the eggs, meanwhile, are getting colder and colder, and he's thinking of his mama. So he starts picking up rocks and hurling them at the chicken, trying to scare it back to the nest. Finally, in desperation, he picks up a particularly large rock and heaves it real hard in the direction of the chicken. He kills the chicken. Over it goes. He looks down at the chicken. He begins to weep. He cries, "Oh, I killed the chicken." And after all that weeping, after a while, he looks down at the chicken. He hears a kind of a growling sound coming from the direction of his belly, and he thinks, well, you can't let the chicken go to waste now. So he starts plucking the chicken and preparing it for a nice little afternoon snack. Then he remembers the eggs. Oh, the eggs, right. Oh. So he goes over, he sees the nest of the eggs, he feels them. Well, they're starting to cool off, all right. So he sort of thinks, he gets what for Vardiello is a brilliant idea. And he decides that he himself will sit upon the nest of eggs and warm them in the place of the departed chicken. So he carefully settles himself, and he looks down, and he lowers himself down, and down, and down. Oh, okay. And then he sits. He's crushed every one of the eggs. He's got omelet now all over his rear end. Oh, and he starts to wail again, but then he remembers the chicken. Oh, right, okay. So he goes back to plucking the chicken, and he roasts it over the fire for a while, and as it's roasting and the aroma is wafting, and he's sort of scrubbing off his rear end a little where the egg is dripped, And he starts thinking, well, if I'm gonna eat chicken, I might as well have wine. He remembers that his mother has a nice keg of Chianti or something in the basement. So he takes a pitcher and he goes downstairs and he turns the spigot and he starts to pour a little bit of wine into the pitcher. When suddenly he hears a noise from up above. He drops the pitcher, crashes, leaves the spigot going. He runs up the stairs to see a pair of tomcats fighting over the roasted chicken. Oh, well, he's running around. He's trying to get the chickens, and they're tearing the chicken apart. They fly off. The cats are gone with the chicken. It's too late. Then he remembers the wine. He goes running down the stairs again. Too late. The keg is completely emptied itself all over the basement floor. Oh, well, at this point, Vardiello takes stock, and he realizes the chicken is dead. The eggs are omelet. The wine is all gone. And at this point, Vardiello begins to think, his mother's going to be so angry at him. He doesn't know if he can face that kind of wrath. And he begins to think of his own mortality, and he decides he's going to take his own life. He looks up at the shelf where his mother had warned him about the poison, and he decides he's going to eat the whole bottle and put an end to his misery. So he takes down the poison and he starts eating it. It's very good. Kind of like pickled walnuts. And he eats and eats until he's eaten the entire contents of the entire bottle. And then he starts to feel a little bit sick in the belly. He figures this must be the poison starting to work. And so he looks around for a place to kind of hide himself away. And he opens the oven and he goes into the oven, shuts the door. And he falls into a deep slumber. Well, a little while later, his mother comes home. She looks around. She doesn't see him. She looks over to the nest. The chicken is gone. And there's a mess of eggs smeared all over. Oh, she starts getting mad. She looks up at the shelf. The jar that used to contain the walnuts, over on its side, empty. Vardiello! Vardiello! Well, Vardiello thinks that instead of going up above where he had been planning, that maybe he's gone down below because he hears the sound of a demon calling his name. And he wakes up, ooh, he's in a very warm place, you understand? And he goes, ooh, and she hears a little rattling. She goes over to the oven, she opens it, Vardiello! Mama, 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 don't yell, I'm gonna die! Vardiello! Well, the fury that is unleashed at this point is unmatched, apparently, in the history of Naples. However, when things had subsided, Vardiello began to talk about ways that he could maybe make it up to his mother. So he said, is there anything that we can sell to get some ready cash? Because he knows they're short of cash in the household. And she says, well, we have this great big beautiful bolt of cloth that needs selling. And I was going to take it out and sell it on the street if I could. But, if you want to do it, fine, go for it. But be warned, Vardiello, she's kind of worried about him. He hasn't done well in the house, and how is he going to do out with the general public? And she can just imagine some smooth talker tricking him out of this bolt of cloth. And so she says, Vardiello, you can sell this cloth, but beware those who are hasty-voiced, and those who speak too much, and who have a lot of words. And you look for someone with few words, and that's somebody that you can count on to make an honest deal. Okay, well, Vardiello takes the bolt of cloth and he heads out, and pretty soon people began to approach him and start asking him things like, oh, Vardiello, that looks like a very nice bolt of cloth there. Is it damask, or what is it? Oh, no, he would say. You have too many words. And he would turn and march away. Well, this kept happening. People kept approaching him and asking him about his cloth, but as soon as they had said 3 or 4 things to him, he said, huh, and he would turn his nose up and walk in the opposite direction. Well, after a couple of hours of this, he began to get tired, and he had come to a part of town that he wasn't familiar with. There was an old deserted house with a deserted courtyard, and there in the courtyard was a statue. Well, Vardiello approached the statue. He wasn't very familiar with fine art. And he inquired of the gentleman if he was interested in buying some cloth. And the gentleman said, nothing. And Vardiello thought, I found my man. And he said, well, what do you think, sir? You know, I could sell you this bolt of cloth, and if you don't have the cash now, I could come back later. I can come back tomorrow. Well, the statue didn't say no. So Vardiello left this beautiful bolt of cloth there at the feet of the statue, and he waved goodbye, and he went back home. Not 5 minutes later, somebody went by, and he saw the bolt of cloth there and took it away. Poor Vardiello, he got home, and he told his mother that he had found someone who was going to be giving him plenty of money. He was sure the next day he had left the bolt of cloth with him. And the mother didn't like the sound of that too much, but Granonia knew better than to weep tears over something that was gone already. So she figured, well, maybe he'll come back with the money, maybe he won't. There's no use worrying. They went to bed. The next day, Vardiello went out, and he returned to the deserted courtyard. He went up to the gentleman. He noticed that the bolt of cloth was gone. And he inquired of the gentleman if he had the cash that was needed for the transaction. And the gentleman said nothing. Well, Vardiello tried to get some kind of word or sign or anything from him, anything about the money, nothing. And Vardiello became angry. And this was unusual for him because he was kind of an easygoing fellow, but he'd had a bunch of reversals lately, and he was feeling kind of low, and he was gotten frustrated, and he knew his mother was waiting back, and finally he did something kind of unusual, which is he picked up a rock, well, maybe not so unusual, and he hurled it at the guy as hard as he could. Well, here's where the story gets interesting. The statue was hollow. So when it burst apart into 1,000 fragments, there, in the midst of all of the bits and pieces of plaster and whatnot, Vardiello found a pot filled with gold pieces. Oh, he was ecstatic! He picked it up, whoa! He went running home to his mother, Mama, look at what I found! Oh my gosh, it's so exciting! Well, at first, Granonia was very excited to see this, but then she began to worry. Because Vardiello, being the kind of guy he was, surely he was going to go and tell all the neighbors and everybody around, oh, I found money, oh. And that was going to bring trouble. So she started thinking, what can I do to make sure that people don't bother us about this? And she got a very clever idea. She told Vardiello to sit outside for a bit, just kind of underneath the upper story window of their house. And she snuck upstairs with a bucket full of figs and raisins, and she began to toss them out the window. Vardiello looked up. Mama, it's raining fruit. Well, he sat there for a while, catching the fruit and eating it and thinking it's pretty cool. Vardiello didn't question things too much, and he figured, the weather is usually pleasant, and sometimes maybe it brings dried fruit, why not? Well, later on in the day, after his nap, Vardiello went out, and he began to tell people his story. Well, he fancied himself something of a storyteller. So he began to tell everyone, I got money, I have this great story, I have money. Well, pretty soon people began to gather. They were very interested in anything having to do with cha-ching, money. And they asked him, well, Vardiello, what kind of money? Let's hear about this. We're kind of interested. They said, oh, it's great. It was that great day. Well, let's see what. It was just the other day. I was wandering around and I found a man and I bashed him in the head. He was hollow. There was money inside him. And then I went home and it rained fruit. Well, the long and short of it was, poor Vardiello was hauled up in front of the magistrate, who deemed him to be incurably insane. And he was sent away to the loony bin. And his mother kept the money and lived out the rest of her days in peace, fool-free.